Hi there friends, Ken here, your Thrifty Apprentice. Happy Sunday everyone. And in today's video, we are going to be tackling one of my favorite watercolor techniques, wet into it. Wet on wet, or alla prima, which is Italian meaning at first attempt, is a painting technique in which layers of fresh wet paint are applied onto a wet surface or onto paint that is still wet rather than onto paint that is dried. The result is colors that blend into one another and mix in the painting. So here, I've printed out a petal from a flower for a wet on wet example. This is Canson 140 pound cold press acid free wood pulp paper. Now I used Canson XL in this particular example simply because I do know that a lot of people paint on it, or is readily available in a lot of big box stores. It is not the best paper in the world, but it is a great paper to practice on, and I felt like it would work well for us doing this example. Now, the idea here is not to paint anything beautiful or perfect, but more so to give you a very up close look at how wet into wet works. So I have a set of watercolors sitting just here off of camera, and whatever watercolors you use to practice, the brand doesn't matter, guys. Don't get bogged down into that. This is just practice. So as we know, wet on wet is to paint wet into other wet paint or onto a wet surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by just wetting this big petal here. I'm using a number 12 round golden Teflon brush. Of course, being golden Teflon, the bristles are synthetic and it will hold water. This particular set holds a lot of water, but on our average, it holds a moderate amount of water, and it's really great for beginners. Speaking of, if you're a beginner, you're probably going to find this kind of interesting. If you've been painting for a while, this particular section might not be too interesting to you, so feel free to skip ahead in the video. All right, so I've got that pretty wet there, and I'm going to check it by simply lifting my paper and tilting it to the light to see if I have a sheen. As you can see, I do. It's not puddling, it's not too much, it's just a nice even sheen on the paper. And I'll let it sit for just a second as I grab the colors that I want. So you know what? Let's do this like I would do a leaf, because we are going to be painting leaves later on in this video. So I'm going to mix out some sap green on my palette. Oh, why not do it blue and green? Since I have blue and green here, the object is simply to show you wet into wet. So I have a wet wash of green, which I'm going to take over to my paper, and I will start at the top of my petal, and I'm just going to drop the wet paint onto the wet surface. As you can see, this particular paint has a little flow to it, so it will bloom out into the wet area. The thing about watercolors are your paint is only going to go where the paper is wet. So as you can see, my paint is not running outside of the area that I wet. Something else you see me doing, I'm actually re-wetting as I go, which is another great technique to keep the area that you're painting in wet enough for you to complete the task you're trying to. So I'm going to grab a little more paint here. I'm going to make my wash a little bigger, a little bit more saturated. And I'm just going to add that color in. This paper does absorb water a little bit quicker than say like 100% cotton paper would. But again, this is just practice purposes, right? So now I'm going to actually re-wet the rest of my petal. Excuse me. And I do understand that Has a little green tint to it. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm going to rinse my brush, and then I'm going to grab some of my blue, which in this case I'm using ultramarine, and I'm just going to drop it right on the side. And I'm going to let those colors blend together on the paper. Now here's the thing. Blue is commonly used to deepen the saturation of a color. In this case, the blue, or the ultramarine blue, is going to deepen the sap green, giving us a different variation of green as they mix on the paper. I'm going to actually drop more sap in here. This is a much bigger area than I was painting in earlier. I just want to make sure that you guys understand what I mean by wet into wet. We're simply dropping the wet paint onto a wet surface, and we're allowing those colors to mix on the paper. We're going to see a much better example once we get to the painting demo for today's video. There, you can see how the paint mixed at the bottom here in order to give me a darker hue of the sap green that was used. And this is a great way to get your painting done in like one go, as long as you're using washes that are saturated enough. Now, the different types of washes is a different video. In this video, we simply want to concentrate on what wet into wet painting is. And here you had an example of dropping wet paint onto a wet surface and then dropping wet paint into wet paint, i.e. wet on wet painting. So, when would you use the wet on wet technique? I can think of 3 examples out of many. 1, when you aim for a spontaneous, fluid, and lively appearance in your work. 2, when you want soft edges on your painting. Or 3, whenever you flip kit want to. Hopefully, you have found some of the information in this video helpful up until this point. Now, what I would like to do is take you along on a painting demonstration with me, where I will be using the wet on wet technique in order to paint a watercolor version of a journal cover I will be using to make a watercolor sketchbook in the near future. Now, the supplies you use really do not matter. Watercolor paper, any set of watercolors, and something to scrape with. I'm going to be using a cut up credit card. You can use the pointed end of an aquarelle brush, if you would like to. The point is to just paint along and to have fun. Now, I will be using Bristol board, Mealing's Pretty Excellent 36 count set of watercolors, some synthetic brushes, and as I mentioned before, a cut up piece of credit card, which we so lovingly call the credit card scraper. So guys, come along with me, paint along with me, and enjoy. Here I have a finished product, well, semi-finished product. I've removed the little masking that I had here. That was a 3x3 block of paper that I put down with some masking tape, which I just rolled on itself. Use that to block that section off because I know I wanted to be putting a book plate there, and I'm going to be turning this into this. And here I have a really cute little journal cover ready to go that I can just put on the front of a sketchbook or journal, more than likely a sketchbook, because that's what I make like most of the time. And of course, I did seal my work with a lamination pouch and some hot heat. You do not have to use this method. This is a method I use a lot of the times. You can use some different things in order to seal your work with, such as a varnish. This happens to be the Krylon brand. It's great for protecting your oil, acrylic, and watercolor. It is acid-free as well. Hairspray. Now let's be clear, hairspray is not archival, and you may run the risk of your project yellowing over time. I'm going to just give you that up front, but it can be used to seal your work. The lamination pouch, it protects it really well, keeps fingerprints off of it, especially when it's something with a white background. And I now have it ready to pop onto the front of one of my sketchbooks. And I will be really happy to show you guys that in an upcoming video. Before I cut out, let me show you the fabric I'm going to actually be using to wrap that sketchbook with, and then placing this on the front cover. As I said, there will be a release coming up on this soon, or a release video, and this will be in it, but it won't be about this. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I really enjoyed hanging out with you. Hopefully you enjoyed something that you saw in the video. If you did, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Jump in the comment section. Let me know, what do you think about today's content? What do you think about how this journal may turn out? I keep saying journal. It's going to be a sketchbook. You know what I mean. Guys, share the video. Sharing is caring. Maybe someone else would love to see this information. And don't forget to check the video description for all of the relevant links, from Patreon to Etsy to the most recommended product list, as well as paints, pencils, pastels, and markers, the Thrifty Apprentice, the Fine Arts sponsored Facebook group. Thank you once again, guys, for joining me. And remember, as I tell you at the end of every video, just keep creating.